Why are we doing the videos? Because we both had some interest in something deeper than ordinary intellectual life and ordinary development, and we, for some reason, both seem to have stumbled on a word to use to apply to that kind of mode of development. We decided to call it shamanism. We're not quite sure that it is actually anything to do with traditional shamanism, but it seems to have some links to do with that and some links to do with certain very interesting intellectuals that also made practicing or what they call praxis or applied theory part of their
Yeah,
ideas.
maybe it's because maybe both of us have sensed a kind of a motif, a shamanic motif in our experience of the history of philosophy.
Um, I would say that I've gone looking for that motif more than actually experienced it, but I believe you've experienced it. I actually I
Okay,
found it in a few places and then I went looking for it.
yeah, I see that, and you see, maybe in my case, maybe I've noticed something. Let's say in my, I don't know, my meditations or my experiences with people like Nietzsche, people like, I'll be honest, Jean-Paul Sartre. Oh, not Jean-Paul Sartre. Sorry.
Not him, no, no, no.
Michel Foucault. Okay, let me say Nietzsche, Foucault, Heidegger, Plato, the Gospels, the Old Testament. All these things for me have had a quality to them that I would have called magical or mystical without any background. But then throughout my life, I kind of, maybe I started thinking of the word witch doctor, or there seemed to me sort of a shamanic motif in all of these different things that I call philosophy. You see what I mean? Especially in the great philosophers, the really special ones. Something kind of magical. It seems to me that in the kind of the contemporary atmosphere of academic philosophy, that anything even close to a witch doctor or anything like magic would be kind of a taboo. That would sort of not really be a very politically correct attitude towards academic philosophy, and that it probably wouldn't get a lot of respect to even be thinking that way. But then, hold on. But then I see myself thinking of people like Isaac Newton and Einstein and all these Enlightenment people, and they to me even seem to be kind of witch doctorish and kind of in that sense. So I'm thinking, well, maybe it has to do with genius, and genius is not a taboo, because even people like Wittgenstein, who was an analytic in the analytic tradition, even analytic philosophers rarely hesitate to call him a genius. So we still have a word in our world today, even in our world that has a taboo for the mystical. There's still a word, genius, which slightly kind of hints at maybe what I call shamanism. You see?
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually starting to see your position more and more clearly, actually, as you speak it. Yeah, there's a kind of a different mental state, a different mood, a different mode of behaving toward the world, which is kind of what you call shamanism, which is very similar to what many people would call genius, because they can't understand genius. It's a kind of
Yeah,
mode removed away from what we are.
there we go. Yeah, okay, but maybe that's because when I think of the traditional paleo shaman, the hunter-gatherer kind of pre-civilized shaman, I think of basically the same thing. I think of somebody, I don't worry too much about the rituals. I don't worry too much about the hallucinogens and all that. What's interesting to me is accessing a kind of a meta-normal or a supernormal mood of the mind. And that this to me is like the discovery of fire. It's very much like the discovery of fire. It's a technique that humans have had. It's a special skill, and it's something that has passed through generations. Anybody who has the technique of fire making in New Guinea today is the recipient of an unbroken chain of teaching that goes back to when people first made fire.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is some kind of element of knowledge that's imparted from generation to generation, and it can seem like a kind of mystical form of knowledge. I mean, from the point of view of the absence of that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an
We can
aspect of.
glorify it a little bit sometimes, but that's only normal. That's natural. I mean, we're gonna give it a kind of a legendary sort of a give it kind of a legendary sort of aura. You know what I mean?
Mm.
But in fact, really, it could just be a kind of a mental state, which igniting that mental state is, I think, a tradition very much like the techniques of igniting actual fire. It's one of the secret skills and one of the secret traditions of humanity.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, and it is actually also. I mean, I can see it. It's also a bit different from how I have been looking at it, of course, as well.
Oh yeah, fine. I mean, because I think of it differently every day too.
Yeah.
I didn't think of this fire thing until a couple of days ago.
The fire thing is a very good analogy, but of course it's more than an analogy. It's something that's actually, you do feel like it's something that is actually fiery or kind of combustible.
Well, maybe in a way, our discovery of fire is itself kind of a metaphor for our real fire. I mean, maybe in some ways we don't realize it, but when people are making fire, they're just in a way in a kind of a
secondary way.
It's kind of an homage to the real fire.
There's a good point. Okay.
Maybe. Anyway,
turn it around. Okay.
As far as our intro, what we're really saying is that, look, in different ways we have come across the shamanistic, the theme of the shaman, and what many people would just call traditional philosophy, okay, or just traditional intellectual genius or anything like that, whatever, and that we feel it's important for some reason that people not forget. Not to allow paleo shamanism to be somehow a kind of a quaint artifact of some remote past, but that it's very present and persistent in what today we might call genius, and that we shouldn't think of things like philosophy at its best or religion at its best as being somehow disconnected from the pre-ancient origins.
Yeah, that is an excellent point, and you are very good at bringing that up, and it's very much an intricate part of your way of looking at things, and I'm starting to see things that way as well.
Okay.
That wasn't my that also wasn't my original way.
If we're going to have a pre-intro, I'm going to have to confess that's how it's come to me.
Yeah, that's cool.
It came to me. Now, of course, I'd like to know, and I think everybody would like to know how the fact that it didn't come to you the same way. Okay, well, let's hear it.
Well, in my case, golly gee. In my case, I did go to I did go to university. I went there a few years after I migrated to the Western world, to Australia.
Right.
And I did have a humanities degree. I did learn a lot of postmodernism and a lot of interesting theory. But to me, that still wasn't shamanism. That didn't belong to my way of looking at things. So I was kind of on the outside of that. And
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
That stage when you were first in university and being exposed to all this contemporary theory, did you at that time even have a strong idea of what shamanism was all about?
No, I did not. Of course I didn't. But
because since you are from Africa, people might assume that you did.
no, I don't think so. I don't think they the only thing they assumed about me was that I was like them, but I was not very good or not very politically correct. But otherwise, they assumed I was exactly like them.
Oh, in
They
other
made
words,
no assumptions.
they assume you were very right wing because you came from a very right wing country.
They didn't assume that I was anything, I guess, politically as such, but that I was just morally suspicious.
Oh yeah, because you came from a country that the world regarded as criminal.
Well, there you go.
Well, did
They,
you see it that way? That was a theme that was presented in the world media.
yeah,
That
well, I guess they assumed I was criminal and they had to keep
yeah,
correcting me.
like people were thinking that at that time that South Africa was kind of a criminal enterprise.
Yeah, and they did confuse South Africa with Rhodesia as
Well,
well, by the way.
the press in the world was very deliberate about looking at South Africa and Rhodesia as very similar. You see what
Yeah,
I mean?
well, there we go.
Yeah, having similarities.
When I came to Australia, people said, they said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Zimbabwe," and they said, "Oh, South Africa."
Yeah.
That's like you saying you're from, I don't know, where are you from?
But I'm from South Carolina, and they're like, "Oh, you're from Virginia." Like, you
Yeah,
can't.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not Virginia, but it's close enough. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, maybe not even close enough. Maybe it's like saying, well, I'm from
Canada,
this little backwater, and they say, "Oh, you're from Nazi Germany. Are you really? How nice, how nice."
I get the point. Yeah, it's a naive association, but the press was encouraging that. You know what I mean? I mean that if you watch the news over the last 30 years, or let's say from the 70s and 80s, you would feel justified in associating Rhodesia with something like South Africa.
Yeah.
The portrait is similar.
Yeah, there were lots of reasons for that, and indeed, even the freedom fighters tried to perpetuate the confusion by saying that they were fighting the Boers, which were the South Africans, the Afrikaners, which, of course, we were not.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah, so there was that deliberate level of confusion on many different levels,
But,
propaganda war.
but in any case, people seeing you come from a place, people seeing you as an African, might also have assumed that you knew everything about the natives and all their traditions and their voodoo and their shamans and their witch doctors. But they might assume that. They might assume that.
They didn't. What they did assume was that I was exactly like them, that I knew everything about Western society. That's what they assumed. They assumed that I was a moderner who understood about Western psychology, Western entertainment, Western politics, everything that they knew, I automatically would know.
Assuming, huh?
Yeah,
Just
just
everything.
assuming, yeah.
You wouldn't have had that problem if you had studied science or engineering, because you would have been with a bunch of people who knew nothing of their own culture. You see, that's the thing. When you get into science and engineering and mathematics, your students don't even know their own culture.
Well, that would have been better.
I
I have actually
I always
reflected.
thought that about you. I always thought you would have been good in math or
Yeah.
meteorology or geology.
Oh well, that's sweet of you. I have the rest of my family, the other siblings, did go into right-wing streams of culture immediately. Well, I guess less so my sister, who went into social work, but then she became a born-again Christian, as it were. So she's definitely in a right-wing milieu, and I think those that have done so have actually benefited much more obviously, and I went kind of left, and then they kept hammering me because you're not supposed to be here and you're evil, and we have to keep teaching you how evil you are because you don't know it yet.
Whether you know it or not, you went seeking trouble. Whether you know it or not, you were seeking trouble.
I was too naive to seek trouble. That's the whole point. I was not knowledgeable enough to seek either peace or trouble.
You were drawn to hostile territory.
I was not.
Okay. You ended up approaching hostile territory.
I'm very liberal in my temperament. I've always been liberal. I'm very, very liberal in my temperament.
Liberal. What is liberal? I don't even know what liberal means. I'll be honest with you. What does liberal mean?
To me, it means very, very open-minded. I accept things as they are, and I'm very curious about them, and I want to look at them, and I don't really tend to judge things or people very much. Rather, I tend to observe them very, very closely.
Well, I tend not to judge people, if that's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
If I was drawn to mathematics, would that be not considered a liberal?
I think a liberal mentality is just an open-minded mentality.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. I mean, see, I think of liberal as being people that like a certain type of literary style and a kind of a certain attitude towards politics.
That's another definition. It's a smaller definition, I think, than the more temperamental liberal.
Yeah, maybe. You might be right. But I think, anyway, but there is such a thing as a liberal somewhere out there. Yeah. Anyway, so you felt liberal, and you were drawn to these fields which involved a lot of literary study. And, you know, that's kind of interesting. So you were attracted to literary things.
I was attracted to understanding more about the structure of my existence because I was totally bewildered. I had no knowledge about the structure of my existence. I hadn't gone through school in Australia very much.
You were a self-inquiry. You were attracted to self-inquiry.
I was attracted initially not to self-inquiry, not initially, until I found that there was something a little bit mismatched about myself, and then it became a self-inquiry. Actually, I was attracted to be honest, going way back, even before I did my humanities course, I set off in a fine arts degree, and I just kept thinking I need an initiatory experience to really feel something about this culture, because I feel nothing about it. It's empty, and I don't understand it intellectually, and emotionally it seems very kind of unsatisfactory to me. It's not appealing on any deep level. So then I went...
Yeah, but a lot of artists from their own countries feel that way about their own countries. You know what I mean? That is true. You have to admit that. A lot of artists feel that way in their own home countries.
I don't know what they feel.
But I do. Okay.
You do. You feel that way.
Because I look at people, I see it's pretty common.
Okay,
and
but
not super common, but it is. You'll see a lot of artists feel like outsiders.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, I had an outsider feeling. Maybe I had some similar, reaction to an artist, but my fundamental problem was that I was a migrant who didn't actually like the new environment. I actually had a certain hostility toward it in my gut level.
Yeah,
I didn't like it. I felt it was kind of plastic and alien and not that real.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of people have made that observation about the Western world. It's not an uncommon thing for people to observe because it's kind of obvious. You know what I mean? Even Westerners sense a certain fake, kind of a, what do they call it? What's the word? There's a special word for it. It's an obvious word. It's they call it. When I choose this word, you'll understand how good it is to describe. There's something kind of frivolous.
Oh, frivolous, yeah.
Kind of frothy and kind of what's another
glossy
word?
And
enthusiasm.
glib, yeah.
It's very, very enthusiasm dependent, and so I think people find that to be a little bit annoying. You know.
I just thought it was to be honest, it was a real come down from some very serious heights of, very fraught, kind of grainy, harsh, but very, very, very intense, vibrant experiences down to a level where you're just looking at cartoons every day and you're kind of interacting with cartoons. And even the newsreaders are a kind of cartoon.
Maybe in a way the Western world is a little bit Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that's when I was craving some kind of initiator experience because I just needed to get deep into the grit of something to feel. I mean, I should have joined the army really, but I needed to feel some kind of emotion or some kind of
You did
terror.
try to join the army, didn't you? You tried to join the army.
I did. I made that effort in that direction.
Maybe that would have been good for you. I mean,
Yeah, it would have been the ultimate culture for me. I would have loved it. Yeah.
okay, well, whatever. But the fact is that eventually you were drawn into humanities.
Yeah. So then I found that in terms of doing fine arts, I was I wasn't really a visual artist. I was always trying to think through. In fact, I found that giving an explanation for my art was more interesting to me than actually painting something. So then I switched to the humanities.
That's pretty good. I really would like to talk a little bit more about how you got into the humanities and how over time the concept of shamanism started appearing and feeling important to you.
Yeah.
Eventually you ended up getting a PhD, you know.
Yeah.
And at some point shamanism became a major theme for you.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's pretty darn interesting.
Okay.
Okay, so anyway, so we've already gotten you into the humanities, but if you could just talk about how you went from the humanities and how that developed to something, talk about how you got into the humanities, then talk about how shamanism even appeared. How did it even appear to you?
Yeah.
How did it come into the picture?
How? Okay, well, I come from Africa. Africa, I think, is a very different sort of a place. For instance, just to give you an example, when I was in Standard 5, which is grade 8, I think, when rain suddenly began to fall over my classroom, every kid got up immediately and went to the window, and they were kind of hung against the glass window because rain had suddenly begun to fall. And it was just like something in us that made us do that, something just, some deeper level kind of pull toward nature. And the teacher said, "Haven't you ever seen rain before?" But I think she also knew what was going on.
No, she had that typical reaction. I know. I know people who are capable of that.
Yeah, but the whole class had that reaction. That was Africa for you. Everybody was like so in tune with nature. Nature was the big thing. And if something happened in nature, we were suddenly alert to it. It was our thing. It was like, how can you not be alert to that?
Yeah.
So this is my background. This is the underlying background.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So then I did the humanities course, and they taught me about postmodernism. This was supposed to help me, but then I went to work for a labor union, and I learned about power rather than about being very kind of clever about reality and kind of adopting different strategies and kind of splintering your identity in a way that was supposed to help you. They didn't really provide the environment for that sort of thing, so I became a very vulnerable punching bag in relation to the power system that was in place there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I see. That's funny because if I knew you at that time that you had finished your university studies, I would have told you as a friend. I would have said, "Do not work for a labor union."
That was the only job I got at that time.
I
WA.
would have said, go wait tables rather than go work in a damn labor union.
Yeah, well, that's nice. WA is a very small place.
I would have had the intuition that would be one of the most hostile places you could ever do. Labor unions are partisan and they are fighting machines.
Yeah.
Okay? They are hostile to begin with.
Well, they were hostile to their own workers, which was interesting enough. They had a lot of infighting toward their own workers. In a way, though, I at that time, because I was so alienated from myself. And because the humanities hadn't really given me very much of what I wanted, even though that experience was absolutely horrible for me, I actually, I found that it put me in touch with what I had been in touch with in Rhodesia originally, which was the spirit of fighting. And so in a way it returned me to myself.
Okay, but can I just ask you a question? Now, this was after you had graduated from university as an undergraduate. Is that
As
right?
I had a bachelor's degree.
Okay, that's all I'm asking. Now, just curious. Now, at this point where you have completed your bachelor's degree, had shamanism even made an apparition to you?
No, no.
So it really wasn't a big thing for you at that time. Okay.
No, I had no notion of it. I had no real idea of anything at all. I had the ambition to prove myself in some way to people that I thought I hadn't proven myself to, and somehow to break through into something that I hadn't broken through into yet, that I felt I had to do.
Yeah, okay. I get it. Yeah. Okay. So you're, in a way, living the typical university graduate experience, which is, I'm going to go make something of myself.
No, not precisely. Nothing about me was typical. I wanted to break through into something that was not in terms of social recognition, I don't think, so much as in something that was
Important. Something important. Well, I don't know. You say it. I don't
something
know.
that I would know when I saw it. Something that was like
Fair
really, and then I did know it when I saw it, because when they did start to attack me, then I saw it that what had been missing from me all this time, in part at least, was that capacity to engage and fight, and that's what Rhodesia had been about, and that engagement and fight was really a strong part of me in some respects.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in other words, getting to the labor union was an important step, because
Yeah.
you were starting to find things about yourself.
I didn't find out anything about myself in the conventional sense. I got broken down to the extent that I found at the bottom base of my being was a fighting spirit.
This is related to shamanism, because part of the way that you helped yourself after you got broken down is part of what led you to shamanism. Is that right?
That
right?
was the beginning of shamanism, because to be broken down is part of the shamanic initiation process.
Yeah, but you didn't know it was shamanism at the time. What you knew at that time was that you were broken and you were slowly building yourself back, or something.
Yeah,
like
I
that.
didn't give it any sort of label. I just saw that I had to change something about myself, and I found some energy within myself, which was the will to fight, and actually even the capacity to fight, which was kind of weird. Like I suddenly was able to put on, as it felt like, some infrared glasses, and to see things that, see different kind of light spectrums or something that I hadn't actually seen before.
Yeah, very good. Pretty good stuff. Huh?
I know you don't believe me. You say it's very good, but yeah.
No, I do believe you. You're misperceiving my tone. My tone is. I'm actually earnestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I am.
Yeah. So I was able to see something that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, so we got to a really interesting part of your history, which was after you, or around the time that you. Why don't we say around the time that problems, hostility issues came up with your job at the labor union.
Yeah.
So that's an important phase in your you might say, the path that got you to consider shamanism to be an important thing in your life.
Yeah, because it actually made me realize that there's a different level to our beings that we don't normally access, and that can not only give us as sort of like different, additional powers, but also give us insights, a different level of awareness that we hadn't had before, and that when we are in very extreme situations, we might be able to access those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, yeah. I totally understand that because, well, we'll get to the theory later, but what you're talking about is what I call spirituality.
Mm.
But of course, now that's one of those famous words. It's a very ideologically charged word, and it's also kind of a weasel word. It's a very ambiguous word. Spirituality, it really doesn't mean much, and I object to the term, but I still use it sometimes because for me, spirituality and genius are kind of the same word, you know. But we'll get to the theory later. We'll talk later about that stuff because that's really important to me. What you're talking about.
Sure, yeah, okay. Yeah, so to me that was a level of kind of switching on other engines inside of myself
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that
absolutely.
had been switched off, kind of closed off before.
By circumstance, you were being forced into what we might call the meta normal, or the super normal, or the super. Call it the super conventional.
Uh, yeah, possibly so. In some respects, I think I was becoming aware of what some people partially knew about all along, that I simply hadn't known about all along, hadn't known about political interactions, the dynamics of social relationships and how they were politicized.
Yeah.
So there was an element of normalness to them as well. But I
Sure.
learned, I was actually supercharged at that point because I was in a fighting mode and I could actually see precisely what was going on around, going on around me in a very supercharged kind of a way.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Now, you felt in a fighting mode. Were you aware of your own anger in that fighting mode, or was your anger not something that was at the forefront?
I had never been aware of my anger. That had been the whole problem. I was a very upset, very saddened, and very distressed person. Also very angry at my circumstances because
Yes.
I'd had to leave my country.
Yeah, I understand, but were you aware of your anger toward
At
the
that point, yeah, I'm going to answer that point now. That I hadn't been aware of my anger at a previous point, but at that point I did become suddenly aware that I had this not even just red hot rage within me, it had turned into white hot. It was this like intense amount of extreme rage that was fueling me, and because it was so intense it made me very cold. I went from hot to cold.
Really? So you weren't able to maintain the white hot anger? It kind of it sort of dissociated into a
It didn't
into a.
dissociate. It enabled an incredible cold focus where I could take people apart and not feel it. Or I felt I could. I didn't really take them apart, but I felt I could.
Were you aware that you were angry at them?
Oh, yeah. I
Have you
was
ever
aware
been,
that I was angry at my circumstances
have
and
you
at
ever had
them.
have you ever had the desire to kill a human?
At that time I did, yeah. At that time I thought that I would kill somebody, yeah.
You could have taken a knife to somebody and stabbed them.
At that time, there was this one person that actually betrayed me.
You could
And
have killed the person.
well, let me tell you, at that time, that not taking a knife to anybody at that time, there was this one person that I had actually taken under my wing, and then she actually made this comment that gave her away. She said, well, I only told them what they needed to know about you. And I thought, well, what the hell do they need to know about me anyway, and why did you tell them something? And
Yeah.
I had this insight that she was just playing me against them, and I thought, okay, now you're going to die. I didn't kill anybody. I would not kill
No, I'm
somebody.
not. Nobody. I'm saying, have you ever felt as though you
I
did?
felt like, that's what I said in my head. I said, now you're going to die. I said that in my head. And then after
Yeah.
that, all I did is I just removed any protection, the invisible barriers that I'd set up to protect her against the bosses. I just removed that. I just pulled them down and I stopped those barriers that had been protecting her. And then they sacked her in a couple of weeks. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I felt like, you're going to die, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll tell you, and I can tell you for one thing, when I get mad at people, I can be angry at people. I know what it's like to feel angry at people. And if somebody I feel is hostile enough to me, I can feel the fantasy of wanting to kill.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's very plain and simple to me. You know, I'm not proud of it, but I have that. I have that capacity. You know, and I have a sort of a thing inside of me which is like, look, you want to fuck with me, okay? You can go ahead. You can fuck with me, but I might fuck with you.
Right.
You know, so you do what you need to do, and just be advised that I can be really fucking mad. Now, if you think you're more powerful than me, and you want to make your moves, then you win the war that you think you can win. Or try. And if you don't think it's a gamble, hey, maybe it's not. Maybe it is. But I can be pretty mean too. I mean, I don't like people who are hostile, especially if I feel like I haven't been unkind, you know, to a certain person. But you know, if people become hostile to me, you know, generally in life, I just withdraw and just disappear. I don't want to have any contact with that person. But you know, sometimes people can be hostile in ways that I feel are very brazen. You know, and it's kind of insulting. You know.
Yeah. Well, for me, because I grew up with a warrior ethos, even though I didn't really understand it in that way. But basically, if you protect somebody, you take them under your wing. You help them, they help you. It's kind of like a lateral kind of support mechanism. And if somebody betrays that, then that's quite an extreme thing for me, as I discovered. So
some people call that gang. That's gang thinking. That's how.
It's not gang thinking.
Yeah, well, it is gang thinking.
Well, it's how you think of as gang thinking. For me, it was tribal thinking. Because I was brought up in Africa.
Now, believe me, a tribe and a gang are, to me, about the same thing.
Yeah, well, they might be, or they might not be the same. If you were brought up in Africa, they might be different. Yeah. Like, to me, the tribe is you just go and look at the rain through the window. It's not a gang. It's not like killing people. It's just like you do the same things. You have this implicit camaraderie, and you protect each other from the authorities. That's basically how it functioned. And when people are threatening your job, you definitely take that seriously.
Yeah, I understand, and you'll see those dynamics in any company and any employment setting. I even have that in the places where I work. There's a sort of implicit camaraderie of employees, and if you're a fair-minded person, you sort of maintain that. That's a human. That to me, that's almost a universal human experience.
Well, I didn't find it so. I found that I was very much on the out and out, and that you know, I had gone out of my way to protect somebody, and that wasn't, and consistently I have found that in a more individualistic, non-African society, that is generally not how things work. People do not have your back. They like to stab your back, but they don't have your back.
Well, I think maybe it's because you were raised in kind of a retrograde society, and if we go back in time to the time that's referenced by the retrogression of your society, that was a time when there was a different type of thinking in the world.
Sure,
okay?
Sure.
And I think maybe you have to understand that the West went through an evolution where the kind of thinking that was home for you was portrayed as a kind of obsolete and kind of a sort of an impotent and maybe an inadequate kind of a thinking in the West.
Sure.
There's a kind of a derision, a kind of a hostility towards.
Yeah, you're telling me that like it's news to me that there was a derision and some hostility.
Well, no,
like this is new.
The United States right now. Okay, see, I was raised by my grandparents. Okay, or my grandparents were very heavy influence in my upbringing, and I learned very quickly that their manners and their ways of thinking were looked at with a lot of hostility by the young culture, which was part of the youth culture was to make a real enemy of certain old-fashioned manners.
Yeah, well, there you go. It might be similar in some respects.
Yeah, and of course now I felt kind of a weird sort of I had this very strange kind of a compulsion. I've always had a rebellious compulsion. And whenever something becomes kind of like a standard orthodoxy, I always feel sort of like, well, yeah, what do you mean? You know, like I feel kind of skeptical about any orthodoxy. And so I noticed that theme, that hostility towards the old-fashioned ways, or the old-fashioned manners of thought, was very big in this country anyway. And I always had a little bit of a desire maybe to be a little bit retrograde, just to be different, you know. Well, and add to that the fact that I really enjoyed my grandparents, and I kind of liked their retrograde ways. You know, I found that to be very charming, and even today, my favorite movies are movies from the 40s and the 30s, and you know, I like old-fashioned manners.
Sure. Yeah.
Don't ask me why. Maybe I think there's something more spiritual, what I call spiritual. I think that I see a genius in some of those old ways.
Well, there are different kind of internal modes of logic. Yeah, definitely relating to these old ways, and you know, there's a certain expectation of reciprocation and different kinds of behaviors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, which I love. I love it. It's very, to me, what I like about the old-fashioned ways is very explicit, and I like being explicit. I just like it. I like being explicit. Maybe it's easier for me. Maybe a part of me is a little bit autistic, and I kind of like an excess of the explicit, because that makes things just less ambiguous.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what you mean by explicit. There's a lot of implicit things in it as well, as I've just related as well. So, you know, if you don't, you know, the reciprocation thing is huge. If you don't reciprocate, you know, sort of goodwill, that's not a very good thing at all. In terms of what I experienced about myself, that was part of what made me feel thoroughly angry, thoroughly rageful.
Yeah, well, you became aware of your anger, and anyway, so, but now see, that could have had a healthy outcome where you would have just been aware of your anger, you would have been deliberate about all this stuff, and deliberate, but something broke down in the process.
What are you implying?
Well, all I'm saying is, from what I remember in you and I talking, there was a kind of a personal breakdown that you had, and I know that's from what you told me. Something
broke down?
You told me that your health suffered. That's what I'm really referring to.
My health had been suffering up until that point.
Oh, that's when you started getting healthier.
Yeah, that's right. When I saw my anger. Yeah.
Okay, that's all. That's the part I'm missing.
Yeah.
So, in other words, what you're describing, this discovery of your own feelings towards fighting and anger, this was actually the beginning of the recovery.
Yeah, that's what I'm describing, because I became aware of different facets of myself that I had been burying, and I had become very divorced from the kind of stream of life, from the flow of you know, kind of a more vitalized level of existence.
Yeah. That really makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is I haven't had your experience, but I can understand what you mean. But I can understand what you mean. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I really can.
Okay. Yeah. As I've tried to explain, I come from a society that enforced a lot of rigid patterns of behavior just for the sake of conformity and maintaining that sense of decorum. So if you have that kind of aspect of that that kind of authoritarian character structure, that kind of rigidity, which is actually not what modern people think it is. It's not being sort of angry or aggro and aggressive. It's actually just being very, very attentive to decorum. And if you have that kind of focus that's very, very attentive to decorum, you you find you get pent up emotionally, but you don't know you are. And some
Yeah.
people within a old-fashioned society, other people would also be equally attentive to decorum. And so you probably you'd be unlikely to find yourself in a situation where somebody was actually attacking you personally or directly or doing something that wasn't already part of the system, that wasn't anticipated.
In the old-fashioned world, people still insulted each other, but people also got into fistfights too back in those old days.
Yeah, we're talking about the American West versus Rhodesian colonial society. These were not the same.
You didn't have men getting into fistfights in Rhodesia?
That wasn't part of the decorum, although people in the army, of course, would express themselves sometimes in that manner. That's a different level. It's not the level I was at. I was the level of the feminine level of Rhodesian society. Different level, totally different.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we're at this point where we're talking about how you started the rebuilding process, partly by discovering your real feelings and who you really were, what you had lost. Reacquiring lost parts of yourselves.
Myself.
Of yourself. Yeah. Anyway, you were gathering your wits.
I'm not sure I was gathering my wits. I was gathering my pieces. Yes, I was. I began to get healthier after that. Before that, I kept suffering from all sorts of viruses and colds and things that I couldn't stop, and allergies, pollen allergies and food allergies. But after that, I began to actually. I felt sort of like the blood flow had been switched on into parts of my body where it had been switched off before. I mean, in some senses, because by that stage I had developed such an incredible degree of anger, all was not well. But at least by that point I was in touch with myself and I understood, I could feel that anger within, whereas before I was probably very angry, but I was kind of like, Ned Flanders on The Simpsons. Yeah. Oakley Dokley.
I have to also wonder sometimes, I support a culture that doesn't encourage fist fighting and doesn't encourage people actually being physical or brutal with each other. But we pay a price for that. Because when you're angry enough to feel like you could hurt somebody and you're not able to actually act that out, just holding that unreleased anger can cause an injury to your own internal.
Yeah, well, because, yeah, exactly. And to be more specific, because I was brought up in the feminine aspect of a warlike society, the Rhodesian women were not really permitted to express anger, ever. The men were, but the women were not. We had emotions that we were not actually permitted to express.
Yeah.
It was actually thought that...
it's kind of like a type of chastity, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah. It was actually thought that through social conditioning and shaping we would become the ideal sort of person, which was not, in their view, the person that could express anger or would express anger, and consequently I didn't. I didn't have a lot of things that a normal human being has, male or female, and I did not understand very much about the world around me, and I did not express anger. And I'm making you very, very tired.
No, me being tired has nothing to do with what you're talking about. Me being tired has to do with the fact that I worked all night last night.
Yeah, okay.
Daytime over here.
I got it. Okay.
Your story is totally separate. Well, I think it's important as we have to be very honest as we have these talks, and I think that one of the honest things we have to talk about is when you're enraged by a person. and you're not able to, have the ordinary, probably what our human instincts are when we were really enraged is to physically fight somebody. Now there are a couple of ways that could be frustrated. If you're being bullied by a person who is physically very much stronger than you, okay, there's a reason why they call it bullying, which is because you may be enraged enough to want to take some action, but because that person is so overwhelmingly stronger than you, you can't take the normal actions you would ordinarily take. And so that causes the weakling in that situation, even if he has the moral superiority, that causes the weakling to actually lose, because he will suffer the frustration of not being able to act out his feelings.
Sure.
See what I mean? So a bullying situation is a very important, you might say, a very important shamanic dynamic, because it's a situation where justice is kind of prevented by just a bad balance of power or whatever. And so the person who's being bullied is gonna have an internal catastrophe of not being able to release properly the frustrations.
Yeah, although that was different in some respects from what I had, which was a characterological limit in being able to release my frustrations, which was also exacerbated by the bullying, but those were two different things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, for example, I have a brother. My brother is a very, very strong person. My brother, he lifts a lot of weights. My brother is also a black belt in martial arts.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, my brother, in very recent times, has treated me with a kind of a disrespect that I would normally not tolerate from anybody. Okay. Now, because he knows that I cannot act on any. If he humiliates me in any way, he knows that I'm not able to act on my humiliation. And if I'm humiliated, I can't have a proper reaction to being humiliated.
Yeah.
He is way too strong and skilled for me to be able to do anything to him. Okay, and so I'm essentially rendered completely impotent, and that hurts me because I'd like to be able to put him in his place and say, you can't talk to me like that.
Sure.
Okay? And so with that leaves me with a frustration that hurts physically. It really hurts. Now I could go out and I could punch I could make a snowman, or I could make a mud man, or I could punch the wall or do something. But that's an effigy. That's not a real substitute for letting out your frustration. So we have to think about, in life sometimes we're going to encounter situations where we don't really have a practical, tactical option to release our anger, if you want to call it that. So we have to hold or do something else with that anger. And I don't know if just noticing it and talking about it is sufficient. I'm not enough of a scientist to know if that's enough. You know what I mean? I don't know enough about the mechanics of the mind to know if it's enough to just be aware of what we're feeling.
No, it's not enough.
Well, and I just don't know that. I don't know I haven't done the empirical studies.
No, I have done in part. I have in part.
Okay.
I've partly done the empirical studies, but I mean on myself. And it took me a very, very long time to diffuse the anger, because by the time I had that level of very white-hot anger, it had been building up over a few decades, ever since I'd migrated pretty much, I'm sure. Because I'd never actually mourned my migration or what that meant. And then people had just set upon me and kept telling me I'm wrong all the time. So, and my father was, a little bit, on edge, like he'd always been.
He was downright antagonistic with you, right?
He eventually, he was, at different periods of life, he was, definitely so. He would take out his anger on me. In early days, he was kind of like a sergeant major, like we would go camping, and then we're just kids, and he would say, "You didn't do the dishes yet?" And then he would start yelling, and "You're useless, you're no good, you don't deserve anything." And he'd be yelling like a sergeant major in our ears, and you're gonna get a thrashing. Do it now. You should have been doing it already.
Yeah. Becoming a little brutal, huh? Now, wasn't there a time that your dad attacked you in your room when you were sleeping? And is it not true that you told him, "I'm going to kill you"? That you said...
You're focusing on a theme tonight. I can see a theme developing.
Well, no, but I think it's important because you were able to verbally return the hostility to your dad in a way that actually helped the situation.
I don't think it helped the situation. I was...
You advised your father that you're not going to take that bullshit? You know what I mean?
It didn't help any situation. It helped me to verbalize something that was in me. It didn't help the objective situation, unfortunately. I wish it had.
You weren't able to intimidate your dad?
I was not able to intimidate him.
Okay.
I've never been able to intimidate him. I've been able to make him feel guilty to some degree. Not as much guilty as he's been able to make me feel.
Okay. Well, hey, I mean, yeah, okay. Well, but at least there came a point where during one of the attacks, you were able to actually feel angry at your dad.
Once the anger was switched on after that union experience, I felt when I was angry and when I was not angry. I felt that I was at war for myself. That
right.
The situation was really that hostile that I had to be alert to my... To protect what was like limitedly mine, my territory, my space, my room to think, those basic, very, very basic human things. So,
believe me, I take those things seriously too.
Yeah.
I think it's important. I think it's very important with dealing with humans or chimpanzees or orangutans or any kind of ape or anything like that. I think or even dogs, animals or humans, we're very sensitive to being humiliated. Okay, and I think even animals know what it means to be humiliated. It is a basic thing that animals recognize, and I think humans have a capacity for humiliation that's very, very intense, very extreme. And I think animals and humans recognize it, and it's a very hostile process of engagement. Okay, and I think it's something that, as shamanic theorists, we need to be very concerned about the dynamics that are involved in humiliation.
Yeah, I think that there's also that sense of it's not just it's not just an emotional sort of identity thing or a psychology thing on a trivial level, but. When somebody actually invades our space, we feel that is very threatening. That they are, making us nervous in ways we don't need to be, and they're taking something away from us in terms of peace of mind.
No, I mean, look, let's not even talk about humans. If we're just talking about chimpanzees, instinctively I know that if I start tampering with the space of an animal, I'm doing something hostile to that animal.
Yeah.
That's not complex. That's not esoteric. We know this is basic.
It ought to be basic. Yeah, it ought to be basic. Yeah.
Even children know when they're teasing an animal or giving a dog a hard time. It's pretty basic. It's not. Children instinctively by age 7 or 8, they know how to tease other kids. They know little subtle ways to make other people feel uncomfortable. That's elementary school knowledge.
But also there's another. Yeah, I sort of agree. But on another level, violence had become very normalized within the society I came from, especially not so much within my sphere, but within my father's sphere, as the kind of male realm of things with the army and stuff like that. Yeah. So I don't think he actually knew that, on some level I think he was dissociating, and I don't think he actually knew that was incorrect behavior. I think somebody could have told him, I did ask people, tell him, inform him that this is incorrect behavior, but nobody actually did.
Well, this is also the problem with people who are unusually strong. The reason why they tend to become bullies is because they rarely get bullied. They're the bulliers, not the bullies. You understand? Now, see, when you get habituated to never being bullied, what happens is all you know how to do is bully other people.
But that's not quite right either.
If you're at the top of the food chain, you're not going to have that experience very often.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you're getting at there, but I do know that
his dad was in the military, and your dad had some rank in the military.
Yeah, a little bit of rank, yeah.
Yep, a tiny bit of enlisted rank. So he was not in a position to be bullied very much.
You might be wrong about that, and especially in his childhood, he was bullied quite significantly.
No, but not as an adult. Not as an adult, and that's what I'm talking about.
He was bullied also to some degree as an adult, I think. Really? I believe so. I believe that it was a tough situation in many respects, yeah.
Yeah, okay, well, that's an interesting concept, and I do think there's a connection between bullies and being bullied. But I also believe that when a person gets too high in the food chain, there is a lack of experience, a fresh experience of being bullied. And I think people need to have, I think people have to be very cautious when they're in a place in the food chain or in the rank, let's say social rank or anything like that, where they're not likely to be experiencing things that should be more common. For an average person.
Yeah, I don't know that I fully agree with your reasoning there. I can understand cultural adjustment, of course, and what that entails, but I think that it's actually incorrect to say my father hadn't been bullied or that I had a very easy life, that nothing had ever upset me or nobody had ever bullied me either. I think that's just very incorrect.
But that's not what I'm saying at all. You see, I'm talking about. Try to tune yourself to what I'm really saying.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what I'm really saying. I did for a minute. I was experimenting with the possibility that maybe your dad didn't have enough bullying. Okay.
That's not true. No way. No way. He had lots of bullying. Nothing but bullying, especially from his father.
I'm having trouble seeing if you can capture that I'm withdrawing from that hypothesis.
Yeah, okay.
I feel like you did not capture my withdrawal from that hypothesis.
I'm capturing it, but I'm just adding a little bit extra.
I withdrew from it minutes ago.
It's cool. It's cool. Let's move on.
No, I don't want to move on, because what I'm saying is that even though I'm withdrawing from that hypothesis about your dad, okay, I do think it's important. It's very important that we examine some of the problems about being ranking in the chain, the pecking order or the chain of command or the food chain. When you have a position of relative power, you're going to, once you get to that position of relative power, you're going to tend to have less of a certain types of experiences that you would have if you were in a more normal position. Okay, I'm not saying it has anything to do with your dad anymore. I'm leaving your dad aside. I'm saying that this raises an abstract, general issue with people, which is that sometimes when you're in a position where you have a lot of strength, okay, you are not going to have certain experiences in a quantity that's similar to normal people.
Sure.
Okay? I think that's something we need to think about.
No, I agree. I think even to give you an example, even when I got my PhD, I felt that somehow something changed in my psyche, and something changed in the general environment, and people just laid off. The bullying just kind of like, it was huge, like, you're a pseudo-intellectual, you're just a girl, you're no good, and then it became, oh, nothing, shh, quiet. So
what do you think explains that?
Good question. I think part of it is it's a kind of initiation to get a PhD, and people kind of sense it in you.
You're saying, I had trouble understanding what you're saying. You're saying that once you got the PhD, suddenly people were treating you differently.
That's right, yeah.
I didn't quite capture that, but now I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you achieve something that people recognize as a kind of a ranking marker,
Yeah.
you are just treated differently.
Yeah, so suddenly people backed off and then they didn't argue with me anymore, and that was just like, well, what happened? They stopped arguing with me, and how weird, but there it is.
I was like, say, when I went to law school, I used to be a lawyer, and how it was when I passed the bar exam and I became a real lawyer in an office, and all these secretaries suddenly were talking to me like I was some kind of, like some kind of authority figure.
Mm,
At first, I thought, why are they talking to me like this? Because I thought I was just some kid.
yeah,
I had to adjust to that.
yeah. Mm.
It's because I had some invisible marker of rank.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Mm.
Well, okay, it can be, anyway, but I'm just touching on that. We'll get to that in more detail later, but it's something that I think it's really important. Rank, I always told you, Jennifer, in all of our emails that rank is an important shamanic concept.
Mm.
Because it is real. And I think we have to discuss it. I think that's the one area where I like Karl Marx. Now, I think Karl Marx was insane. Like a lot of geniuses, he was truly insane in a couple of different ways. But that doesn't prevent somebody from having some special insight. Okay?
Okay, I'm not sure if Karl Marx was insane.
Well, I'm sure he was. I'm sure that he was.
I do think that in a totally, well, maybe somewhat different way, I do think that rank, I mean, my Rhodesian rank was great in many respects, but it also protected me from actually my own anger, from actually being in touch with a level of visceral anger that even existed in my prior society. So it was existent, it was actually there, but because of my level of rank, I had no direct knowledge of it. And that was a limit on me, ultimately.
Now, you did have knowledge of it.
No, I didn't.
Well, hold on. I have a different definition of knowledge than what you do. Okay. For some people, knowledge, and I want to confess something. I'm going to be very straight with you. I have never, ever really held the basic common knowledge, the common definition of knowledge. The common Western definition of knowledge is this kind of this sort of like a registry of the truth of something, where you full mapping and awareness of where things are and what things are. I've never considered that to be knowledge. Okay, I call that like registry. That's like mapping registry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that's data registry.
Okay.
That's whether something is visible or invisible. You see what I mean?
I agree with that. That's what I mean by I didn't have the proper deep level.
But I don't define knowledge that way. See, to me, knowledge is experience. Now, in experience, when you experience things, some things are going to register and some things are not going to register, even though you're having that experience. Okay, when I have the experience of being in seawater, when I'm swimming in seawater, okay, I'm having an experience with the iodine that's in the seawater, okay, but I don't necessarily register it. You see what I'm saying? I don't necessarily register the salt content and the mercury content. Okay, I have the experience of it.
Sure.
You see, so I have knowledge because I'm communing and commingling with this stuff, and that to me is how I define knowledge. But knowledge doesn't always include registry. You see what I mean?
Sure.
And so this doesn't include reading registry. It can just be contact. Okay, so if I'm having, let's say, an anger experience that I'm not, let's say, by circumstances, I'm not permitted or I'm not designed to actually register that anger, I'm still having it. And I still call that a knowledge. But it's the hidden knowledge, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
In my way of talking about knowledge.
Yeah, and that's a valid way to express it. In my case, of course, what I was getting at as well is that the society was very much sectored off into different parts where certain types of people had certain types of knowledge about certain types of things and not about other types. So the Rhodesian male would have knowledge of certain things that his wife would not know about.
Okay. Well, see, and you see, I would call that in my world, the way I define knowledge, I would say the males had registry of certain aspects of the knowledge, whereas the females would not have registry of certain aspects of knowledge. But everybody would share the knowledge. It's just that some people would have the mark of registry, the other people would have the mark of that would have a block to the registry.
I don't
Oh,
know.
that's how
I
I use
think.
the word knowledge.
Hmm?
Okay. That's how I use the word knowledge.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I understand, I think, but maybe there was also not registry in some instances as well. There was just a lack of the information, as well as, more importantly, the lack of the experience, which I think is much more important. So the women would not know on some fundamental levels what their men did know.
Okay. Okay. I got you.
Mm,
I see that that's your thesis about that.
yeah, I see.
Yeah, and absolutely. We may not fully agree. I would say that on some very deep level, the women were not exactly aware. I wouldn't say fully aware, but there'd be a hinting of awareness, some that kind of contact awareness that's very deep, but not registering.
Maybe so, but I do think that, yeah.
The sense of traces, in the sense that the man might have secrets, but you feel the trace of it because you can feel things. You know.
I think it's very, very hard to conceptualize for modern people that sense of difference. It wasn't just a gender difference, it was actually a segregation of experiences in a very formalistic and very kind of predetermined and prescribed manner. So it wasn't just like, oh well, you have a you know but you don't, or you have a different range of experiences but they're kind of similar. It was quite dissimilar. You had a different role in society which made your knowledge very dissimilar in some measures.
Well, what I'm saying though, I'm saying something that's pretty sophisticated. And I'm not going into a lot of detail because I don't feel like wasting time, but now I'm going to waste the time. Okay. When let's say I'm a man and let's say I have a very segregated experience, okay, and let's say I'm not sharing any of the details of what I know in my segregated experience. I come home to my wife and we don't discuss any of the facts or any of the subject matter of my segregated experience. But I do believe that there are emotional markers that sort of are carried with my private experience, okay? And that people will react to the emotional trace that exists as a kind of like a rash on top of the private experience. You know, for example, let's suppose that I'm being sexually molested by a priest while I'm 13 years old at a church, okay? And I know that I don't want to tell my parents anything about what's happening because they know the priest and he's a friend of the family. And I know that I just have to be secretive about this. I'm not going to say a goddamn word about it, okay? My mom can sense there's something going on. She doesn't know what's going on. If she took a lie detector test, she doesn't know what's happening with me. She knows that something's happening with me. You see what I mean? We carry an emotional evidence of things that we don't reveal, okay? So there is a kind of a contact touching of these hidden things. It's just that how you read that, it would be at a very deep level, and you wouldn't read it accurately. It's just it's a sensate contact with
Yeah, no, in that sense, yep, good. I do get what you mean. I understand what you're saying in that sense. Yep, I understand it. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's all I'm saying. And granted, I don't believe in anything like I don't believe that there's a way to decode surface. That kind of like call it the emotional signs of hidden secrets. I don't think there's a way to read from the emotional data exactly what's being hidden. I'm not that stupid. Obviously, secrets can be made. You can have real secrets where the details are always hidden, but there is some kind of information passing. It's just a kind of on an emotional level.
Yeah. Well, that's a different thing. That's a more shamanic thing. I was just talking about cultural structures, actually.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I understand.
And I think it's important because modern people and just generally speaking, they don't, even when you explain it, some people have trouble trying to grasp what very, very formal structures might be like.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. So like there are some things that, you don't do, you don't know, you don't see, just because of where you are in that society.
Yeah, sure. I get
And
it.
it makes you less than a whole person in some respects. I don't mean if you stay in that society, it's not so bad, but if you have to move, then you've got to have all those different other functions. You've got to be able to be aggressive if the circumstances call for it, or, to be able to defend yourself because the men are not defending you, so who's going to defend you?
And it's, in other words, you have to be able to act in ways that do not correspond to the way you were raised.
You have to be able to flesh out those different aspects of society into one person, rather than have just like a functionary part, or just be one function of that society. Like the women were just one function; they were kind of nurturing and in some ways authoritative, but not aware on the deep visceral level of war. They were kind of very superficially aware.
Yeah. It sounds to me in many ways that Rhodesia in some ways was like an early 20th century society, and in some ways it was even like a 19th century society.
Yeah, or earlier.
Yeah. That's kind of weird.
It is weird, yeah.
Like if you went to Pennsylvania, you may know what Pennsylvania is. Pennsylvania is a state in the United States. Okay? In Pennsylvania you have people that live in the 16th century.
Yeah.
Century society, and it is a truly retrograde and almost impossible to describe to outsiders. And the only people who really understand it are the people who are living in it. And when they have to assimilate, and if people become excommunicated and they have to transition into the 21st century, they go through a tremendous culture shock.
I expect they would, yeah. I
They
expect
really
so.
They have a fairly high suicide rate too.
Yeah, unsurprisingly.
Not surprisingly, of course, it's not surprising. And of course, another example of people who are very retrograde like that are ultra-Orthodox Jews. The ultra-Orthodox, they dress and they act according to mores of the 16th century.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, we have to be aware that there are different levels of development and progress even within the same society, and some people are, functioning within even modern society at a much earlier level, and some people at a later level, and yet they're all living in the society in a parallel track. So that's definitely the case. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, think of Rhodesia. You guys had, on the one hand, you had some people who were piloting the most modern jet aircraft, and yet the fabric of the society was in some ways in the 19th century.
Yeah, and as I've said to you, in some ways it seemed like it was kind of 18th century romanticism, because we were very, very, very close to nature, and nature spoke to us all the time, and we were not very, very mechanized or very industrialized, and we didn't even think in those terms.
Well, except the people whose job it was to go fly a commercial airliner, at least some part of their life was firmly in the 20th century.
Some part of their life, yeah. There's a certain level of adaptation, but it's not necessarily the whole person.
They would go home to a house and a home that wouldn't be anything like the flight deck of the aircraft that was their work office.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. It's not like people were deliberately retrograde. They actually embraced technology. They actually believed that they represented technology in some ways, but the cultural system was very formalized. The roles and the gender roles and the race roles were very formalized.
Yeah.
Very, very formalized. And adults and children were very formalized into very different roles, so the children were not the same kind of creature as the adults. It's sort of British 19th century idea that children should be seen and not heard, or they run around and they're kind of natural like animals, but then when they come of age, they suddenly snap into adulthood and.
Yeah. Well, hey, I mean, it's an interesting way to think, and it's part of our history. It's just you actually got to live a little bit of it. For a lot of us, only our grandparents ever lived in a world like that. But you actually got a taste of it just because you happened to be brought up in a country that was still in that way of thinking.
Yeah, I think I was very lucky actually in that sense. As a child, I don't mean as an adult, which I wasn't, but as a child I think I was extremely lucky to have that kind of wild way of being.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty interesting stuff, and in a way, you're a living fossil because you are.
Thank you.
Yeah, you are. You're a person alive today who has first-hand experience of a way of living that for many people is only their grandparents and great-grandparents would ever remember that.
Yeah, if so, because I think even the grandparents and great-grandparents in industrialized societies would still not remember that. I think you really need to go back a couple of centuries.
Generations, yeah. So you have, I mean, when I say fossil, I'm not kidding. I mean.
Oh, well, that's great. Thank you. And I'm only 46.
That's what makes it so interesting, It's like in a way, you're coming out of a time machine.
Yeah, I did come out of a time machine.
Yeah.
I did.
It's a little bit sci-fi.
Yeah, a little bit. That's why I think there's a time machine dimension to shamanism as well, but I often go into the future as well in my dreams, very far into the future.
Why wouldn't you?
I don't know.
So anyway, so after the experience with the labor union, how many years passed before you even started thinking about a PhD?
I had to recover because my digestive system had broken down, and I began reading Nietzsche during that time. I began reading avidly to catch, in a way now retrospectively it seems, to get some insights into myself and others and to catch myself up to the 19th century. So then later I would catch up to the 20th and a bit later.
Let me ask this question. What gave you an idea that Nietzsche was even somebody who could help you at all?
I didn't. Because I was a humanities graduate, I thought philosophy ought to be able to help me because it's the love of wisdom.
Okay.
And
right.
I was, during my lunch break, I went around the corner and there was a bookstore, Dimmicks, and they had a lot of Nietzsche books in. Suddenly there were, they for some reason they ordered in just all of his books, all the stacks of them, and I began reading them one by one. So it's accidental.
Yeah. Anyway, so you just had an inkling that this was going to be a good, useful thing. And how long did it take from first reading books of Nietzsche to start even imagining, hey, maybe I want to get a PhD? Or how long did it take?
A couple of years, I think. A few years, 2 or 3. I had to recover my health, and I kept reading Nietzsche in that process, trying to learn more. And then I decided to go back to university because I still didn't know enough. I still was hungry. So I thought, well, if I do a PhD, then that will satisfy me. So that's what I did.
Yeah. So it took a couple of years, and then after the couple of years, you went ahead and did what was necessary to apply for a graduate program.
Yeah, I just applied and I got in, yeah.
That's perfect. Cool. And so then once you got in, how long did it take before you started to think of shamanism as a big theme?
Let me recall. So I immediately thought that because I wanted to reconnect with my African roots, because I thought there was something vital about that, vitalizing, I found the Marichira books in the library, and his writing seemed really streets ahead of anything else that was in that Africa section, which was quite small.
Okay.
When did I start to think of shamanism? When did that idea alight on me? That's becoming a difficult question, because I think originally I saw links between the way that Nietzsche was writing and the way that Marichira was approaching his life, that kind of sense of being in a void and just reaching out from this not knowing kind of state, and detailing your perceptions as if they were very, very important from this position of not just being totally open and not making any claims on the basis of prior knowledge. And I think shamanism was a term that I eventually started to coin as perhaps the most meaningful one a couple of years, maybe, or 3 years, 2.5 or 3 years into my degree.
Okay.
Because why did I do that? I'm having trouble recalling the exact reason at this moment, but maybe it's getting late.
Hey, look, my yawning, I'll take responsibility for my tiredness. I mean, I'm going to sacrifice a certain amount because I think this is a very worthy interaction.
Yeah.
I like what you're doing. I'm willing to be tired.
Okay, you want me to continue?
Yeah, I do. I think this is very important because we're getting to a point where shamanism started to appear to register to you as something important.
Yeah.
And you were starting to link it indirectly to someone like Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Indirectly, because you were really attaching it to someone like Marichira, but you already were making associations between Marichira and Nietzsche, so already you have an indirect link to philosophy proper.
Well, what actually happened is that I found that there were lots of things that I personally could not communicate about myself, and of course that links back to my origins in a totally different culture and my inability to speak, and I found that I could nonetheless hear something within Nietzsche that spoke to me and hear something within Marichira that spoke to me. And they seem to be utilizing a different channel or a different dimension from the kinds of people that didn't speak to me.
Can we even say a different mood?
Yeah, we might. I'm not sure.
I'll tell you one thing. When I read Nietzsche, one thing that I can sense is a mood.
Yeah, there is a mood.
When I read Nietzsche.
That's good that you sense that mood. Yeah.
If we read Kierkegaard really carefully, Kierkegaard is aware of moods and how they relate to thinking.
Yeah.
He doesn't say it with that language, but I can tell he's very sensitive to that.
Yeah.
Anyway, but you were talking about a certain tone or a channel.
I'm talking about the different dimensions of being that they were both tuned into. They were both aware that there were other levels of being apart from the ones that people normally recognize and communicate about.
Yeah.
And they were able to...
You could taste it, couldn't you? You could taste it, couldn't you? I'll tell you, when I started reading Nietzsche, and I felt very similar to when I would read Plato or when I would read the Old Testament or any of these things, I felt a special electricity. It was a very special. It felt a very privileged. It felt very special. It was. You could taste it. And with Heidegger, the same experience. Very special.
Yeah, that's what I experienced from them. There was another level. There was something that was coming through, and that actually enabled me to kind of map myself better and. kind of flesh out different situations and see bigger contexts and more complexity and more interactions within those contexts and things that I'd never ever seen before. And
Can I ask a question?
yeah,
Have you ever read anything by Ayn Rand?
yeah.
Have you ever read anything by Ayn Rand?
Yeah, I've seen the books, but I've never read that.
Yes. You don't realize this. You wouldn't have any reason to realize this. But your constitution and your personal charisma reminds me a lot of her.
No, is that an insult?
No, it's just a remark.
Yeah,
It's an
okay.
observation. I like her very much. I'll be honest with you. I thought she was a very I would say more kind of a prophetic sort of a shamanic person, and you actually do remind me quite a bit of her.
I see. Okay, I'm not sure I do see, but I'll think about that one.
Well, you wouldn't have any way to know what we're talking about. I would have to should refer you to maybe a video of her being interviewed, but you have a very similar demeanor, very similar intellectual demeanor. Yeah. I mean that as a compliment because she's one of my heroes.
Compliment for once, okay. No insults, good, okay.
Anybody who's watching this video very quickly will start to despise me for many reasons. Many reasons they will start to despise me. One of them will be how I speak of Ayn Rand in these favorable, glowing terms. Another will be how my voice raises and I get real domineering. They're gonna hate my fucking guts. And I want to make sure that you don't edit out these little comments that I'm making.
No.
They're gonna hate my fucking guts.
Okay.
You'll see if this is on YouTube, you'll see little comments below. I hate that motherfucker. He's such an asshole. He's such a, who does he think he is that I hate it? They're gonna hate my guts because.
Wow, that would be an achievement. That would be great. Yeah.
Let me tell you, Trevor, I guarantee you, I can tell you this, it's unfailing. People tend to hate my fucking guts.
Do they? I don't know. What's wrong with your guts? Huh?
They really hate my guts.
Well, they probably hate my guts too. I've had certain experiences that indicate as much.
There will be a weird psychological effect where the hatred of my guts will be so intense that they will see you in glowing terms, and they'll think I'm attacking you and bullying you and pushing you around and being. But people will look at you and you will be so fucking favorably viewed.
I yearn for that day. That'll be the day of my glory.
Well, you'll have that. You'll have it. I'm sure of it. Anyway, but I'm really excited because you're talking about how this introduction to Nietzsche and then eventually to Marachera was a very special experience and on a mood level, but also it was something very unusual and very special.
It seemed to me that they were also able to move between different worlds, the different levels of the psyche, like the very dark, nefarious aspect of the psyche, or the, what I think Nietzsche refers to, as other worlds or in one place, and the subterranean level in another place, and those kinds of sort of unconscious subliminal levels. And Marichura could do that very well.
And don't you admire about Nietzsche how he was so comfortable with his own hostilities? He almost seemed to enjoy expressing hostility at times.
Yeah. And as did Marichura.
He had no real shame about it. He was just very open and you might say liberal in that sense, huh? Yeah, liberal. I dare say.
I would say in my earlier use of the term, yes. In that use, very liberal. Yeah. And Marichura did as well.
Yeah, I also like the way Nietzsche was so comfortable with sarcasm.
Yeah, he was, and that little more subtle, ironic twist all the time, really. But
he had no hesitation to humiliate things at times.
Yeah, and sometimes it blew up in his face, like in Twilight of the Idols, I think, when he's attacking the origin of Christianity as being Jewish. I think that was widely misunderstood as anti-Semitic, but sometimes it just blew up.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I think a lot of times we want to think of the great geniuses as being these sort of like supernaturally impeccable creatures who have this sort of perfection of omniscience or whatever. We forget that even a genius can have sloppy facets, whatever. That's not a big. That shouldn't be a big problem. But apparently, for some people, they want to think of these people as so perfect.
Well, people worry because they're spokes. You know, they have power, as you were talking about earlier, the capacity to amplify your voice and to have authority, and then once you have that, people actually they don't understand you, in my view, on a shamanic level necessarily. They understand you as an authority that's telling them what to do, and then they think that yeah.
You know what my attitude is for those people? Really tell them what the fuck to do.
Yeah.
Telling them what to do, I'll say, yeah, I am telling you what to do. I'm telling you exactly what the fuck to think and to do. Yeah, I am doing that. I want that. But you don't tell me what to do. Yeah, I'm telling you what to do. Like, basically what I'm saying is get the fuck out of my face.
Yeah.
And so then when they stop paying attention to me, I told them what the fuck to do. You see, they're following my orders. Get the fuck You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I want them to hear me that way. I really do. Get the fuck out of here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I don't mind how they hear me. They can hear me however they want to, but I think generally...
I want them to mishear me. I want them to hear me as telling them exactly what the fuck to do. I relish that.
Well, I have my own twist. For example, if somebody addresses me like, "Oh, you think you're my mother? You want to tell me to wipe my bottom, and I'm not going to." I say,
"My fucking ass better." Yeah, that's exactly what I'm telling you.
I say, "What's the matter?" I say, "Did you dirty yourself again? What's the matter?" You come over here to my site, and you're all dirty.
Yeah. Oh boy. Okay.
Because you do get a lot of trolls with that kind of problem.
Yeah. Well. Oh well.
That's a loose bowel syndrome.
Right now, I'm having a little bit of a. I ate a big. I made a big fry-up breakfast about an hour before we started this.
Good. An hour.
Well,
okay, so you're still doing morning time. Okay, yeah.
I like to fry the breakfast.
I love a fried breakfast.
Yeah.
Fried breakfasts are great. Yeah. Good.
Well, okay. Well, anyway, so we're kind of at this point where you enter the graduate program and you have this experience with Nietzsche, Marachera. Where do you start to really start thinking about the word shamanism? When does that really emerge for you?
I was trying to pick I believe, and my memory is starting to get vague because I wrote that thesis so long ago. It was kind of a mysterious experience for me. But I was trying to pick a word that would exemplify the capacity of people to go into that deeper level of the subconscious or the unconscious or other, underlying worlds, subterranean worlds, that wasn't the same as psychoanalysis, and that I think I probably alighted onto the word shamanism as a kind of evocative word, maybe not quite accurate, but sort of evocative in that sense. Yeah.
Okay, help me understand. When in your life did you start to have an aversion, or when did you start to have a sense of psychoanalysis had something kind of corrupt or kind of hypocritical about it or whatever, sort of suspicious? When did you start becoming suspicious of psychoanalysis, and how?
I had some run-ins with a few people that I wanted to get some reaction from for my writing, and inevitably they talked down to me as if I were some kind of little idiot. I don't know what brought that about really, but I started to think, well, like, if psychoanalysis kind of inevitably evokes that paternalistic paradigm and makes people talk to each other in that way, that's really not what I'm getting at all.
So in other words, without having actual direct contact with psychoanalysts,
I did have a direct contact with, I think, one at least, yeah.
in other words, you had some informed basis to discern something in the, let's say, in the field of psychoanalysis that you felt was sort of maybe masquerading as a very high form of spirituality, but you felt there was something kind of corrupt about it.
I felt that it was a fundamentally Western phenomenon that addressed something of a much narrower context than the one I had come from. I mean, the historical context I came from seemed to be outside of psychoanalysis, and trying to apply psychoanalysis to myself, I couldn't make it work.
Okay.
And then I had a few people that were very knowledgeable about it, and they seemed not to be able to make it work either. So I learned a lesson from that.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay. Well, I mean, I think it's interesting because you're getting a flavor of some special experience or mood coming, let's say, certainly out of Nietzsche, but also out of someone like Marichera. What I think is interesting is that even Freud himself was very influenced by Nietzsche. So Freud even got a strong flavor or taste out of Nietzsche, and yet Freud himself developed a way of thinking that maybe even Nietzsche himself wouldn't have necessarily, you know what I mean? Something that maybe in a sense kind of inferior, and yet inspired by, you know. I've always thought that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I see the link as well. Yeah, I do. I think that, but for me, Freud kind of, like a lot of people, betrayed Nietzsche and sort of re-entering him, much like Heidegger did in some respects, into the Judeo-Christian stream, which is a theological stream that Nietzsche was trying to fight tooth and nail to get away from.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important. One thing that I will always tell you for sure is that I do see a difference between the Christianity as a dogmatic aspect of culture and what we might think of as like the true origins. You know what I mean? I believe that the true origins of Christianity and Judaism even are very shamanic. Okay, but that doesn't mean that the dogmatic institutions or the dogmatic structures have anything to do with that. Much in the same way that someone like Freud could be inspired by someone like Nietzsche, but create a kind of a dogmatic structure that really has nothing to do with the inspiration.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, it's not that psychoanalysis lacks any insight or that it's totally devoid of any kind of, deeper level analysis or, insight, but what it does tend to do is it does tend to straitjacket people into conformity with a mid-20th century way of life, or otherwise label them as pathological. So it actually functions in many ways as a straitjacket for nonconformists, and that is most unfortunate indeed.
You see, and I have a much simpler way of saying it. I just think that psychoanalysis is, to me, a very psychoanalysis is an intellectual structure. It's a theoretical structure that, to me, is pretty much spun in the centric mood.
That's a good way to say it. Yeah, that's a very good way.
but like a lot of things are. It's not
Yeah.
just like that.
You have to bear in mind that I read a few literary criticisms of Marichera, and he being somebody that had helped me to have insights into myself much in the same way that Nietzsche had helped me, and then seeing that these guys were simply labeling him as, oh, you're just a deviant, you're just like something wrong with you because you stutter. And these kinds of 20th century put-downs, you're not a conformist to white middle-class society. I thought that was really rather offensive and really rather bent.
Well, yeah, okay. And what I'll say is that we haven't gotten to my story or anything, and I don't know that many of you.
Oh, okay.
We're not going to even get there right now. But what I'm saying is, if we ever get to a place where I could talk about my experience with psychoanalysis, then I'll also talk about how I came to these things. You had your own idiosyncratic way of finding something fishy and suspicious about psychoanalysis. Well, I also did too, but obviously I had a slightly different way of getting there.
Good. I look forward to hearing that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But, to me, psychoanalysis, I'm just going to tell you, it's just like any other, structure in the mode of centrism, the centric mood. They're all kind of the same thing. I mean, dogmatism, it can have many different faces, but it's all sort of the same way of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and we'll talk more about what centrism is and elaborate on that as well.
That's getting into the theory, right? Anyway, so slowly you're developing this connection where shamanism is starting to have a name for you, and it's starting to be something for you, and it's around the time that you're in your PhD program.
Yep, that was around that time. Toward the end of that, I began to hone in on that kind of theoretical position. It's not really a theoretical position, though. It doesn't actually work as one. It's more of a evocative kind of term for something that I think is actually beyond the centrism position, beyond what we consider to be conventional or normal ways of talking, or ways of adapting to conformity. These are this to me had to do with a way of living without conformity, sort of beyond those limits.
I'd say that very, very slowly you were developing your relationship with what is the true metaphysics, the real metaphysics. I've decided to withdraw my use of the term metaphysics. I'm going to start using the term, extraordinary or superordinary or supernormal.
Sure.
But this is what I think is the real metaphysics. The real stuff.
Yeah, well, it seemed to embrace the more holistic possibilities of humanity rather than trying to slot you in and make you do something in a sort of rigid kind of manner.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that total awareness of that the human is more than what the society or the sort of moral structures have use of for that human being.
Well, let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you how I define theology and how I define God. Okay, for me, God is nothing but the abstraction, which is the account. It's the account. Okay, the accounting factor of our, you might say, our ruling forces, or it's the account of what rules us. Okay, now, obviously, on a purely physical basis, we could talk about just physics. I mean, that's obviously a ruling account. Okay, I mean, that's just, you can't argue with that. Chemistry, biology, whatever. But psychologically, there are two basic ruling accounts of humans. Okay, one is the herd dynamics, because that is a ruling account. You see what I mean? That does account for the ruling of humans.
Yeah.
The herd dynamics have something to do with it. Okay, but then there's also that thing called genius, which is outside the herd, which is beyond the herd thinking. Okay, And so I think these are the two, you might say, the two dimensions of the ruling account, the psychological ruling accounts of people.
Sure.
So these are the two faces of God, so to speak, where God is the account of the rule, what rules us, the lordship of our existence, our psychological existence. And so I think that this is how I define God. Okay, and I think of theology as the science of discussing the accounts and the theory of the accounts. So in my way of thinking, we're talking about theology. But I've decided to abandon the term metaphysics, so I'll abandon the term theology, and we'll just say accounting, and it's fine with me. I don't have any religious attachment. I'm not a naive mystic.
Are you there? Hello? Hello?
You and I are somewhat similar. We both believe that herd ruling, the herd aspect of psychological ruling, is probably not something that we want to universalize. We want to leave room for other aspects of psychological rule that are not just herd based. Okay.
Yeah. We can see. But Ty is very, insightful. I mean, lots of people are. You're very insightful, of course, in your much more novel and impressive terminology, but just recollecting what I know, that one of the aspects, little ideas he brought up was that the interchangeable parts are the kind of herd dynamic, in a sense. Well, he didn't use herd, but if something is interchangeable with another, then it's not, it's not that mysterious. It's not that. It's somehow there's something that's a little bit basic about it that we kind of despise in a way. It's sort of
yeah. Well, I think
I think what we'll find as we develop our theory, Jennifer, we'll find that centrism and herd thinking, the mood of herd dynamics and the mood of centrism are just the same thing. I think we'll eventually reach something similar, or at least I will propose that.
I think that's a good trajectory. Yeah, it makes sense.
We may refine things here and there, but that's one of my basic initial premises. And I just think that for me, genius or shamanism or whatever you want to call it is the other dimension, where we're not just bound by the herd mechanics or the herd dynamics. And granted, a lot of people see the mood of the herd, the centric mood is so insidious that even when we think we disavow the herd, we could still be completely the puppet of the herd thinking.
We're always gravitating toward it because of, as I suggested to you, even language. We try to use terms in common with other people, and then immediately, even in this conversation tonight, we have to find terms in common, and we're gravitating toward that centrism.
Yeah.
Or even experiences in common, so, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, see, Grant, this is another thing that's important. See, when I talk about Apollo, the reason why Apollo is so important to me is, I see Apollo as the balancer, but not the perfect balancer. Apollo is the whole array of harmonies, and the lesson that we don't escape herd thinking. We just develop harmonics with it. But we harmonize with the herd thinking by accessing another dimension, but we don't go exclusively into that dimension, or we don't disappear into that other dimension. We remain in a harmonic position with the herd, where we end up in a bihemispheric mentality, as opposed to going from one hemisphere to the other and disappearing into the other hemisphere.
Yeah, well, what we've been trying to do tonight, in fact.
Okay, well, anyway, that's why, for me, Apollo will always be interesting, because unlike Nietzsche, I don't see Apollo as this kind of naive emphasis of structure. For me, Apollo is the blending. But I'm always going to say that, because that's really important to me. I think it's important that we be a little more mature in how we talk about Apollo.
That makes good sense. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I feel like I have some delusions in life. and a part of me feels like I have a kind of a personal relationship with Apollo, like maybe a sort of a Delphic mission in a way. I don't know. I have a lot of respect for the Oracle of Delphi, and because remember, the Oracle of Delphi, we don't remember this, but the Oracle of Delphi is a participant in what is today Western philosophy. Without the Oracle of Delphi, Socrates would have had no accreditation. If you read the ancient, the Plato, the only true accreditation of Socrates was not given by Plato. It was given by the Delphic temple.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's just common. Any
common knowledge.
any first year philosophy student should be able to tell you that.
Well, thank you. Okay.
It's something we don't think about sometimes.
Okay. Right. So. Well, that's good.
Anyway, so okay, so have we gotten? How much of your story have we gotten? Because I thought it would be really important to kind of develop a sort of a trajectory of how shamanism wasn't an important word in your life, and then as you evolved through your graduate program, it not only became an important word, but it became a signal for a real, I don't know, like a real, it became a signal for what wisdom really meant to you, and how so many other commonplace aspects of academic thought and Western thought really were not like that for you.
It became a signal for what whole being, the wholeness of being meant to me, and those parts that were not included within the formula of academia and the language of academia, those parts that were a part of me. So not so much, it wasn't so much an emblem of wisdom actually, but an emblem of wholeness for me.
Yeah, how nicely put. I like that way of saying it. I'll be honest with you. I think there's something very beautiful about that. I think this I hate to say very Apollonian about what you just said.
That's how it seemed to me, and there were also some non-Apollonian aspects, some Dionysian aspects too that I had to learn. I had to learn in that spirit as well, which of course was mostly from Bataille, because he is more in that spirit and gave me access to, and Maritura of course gave me access to those levels. So.
You see, I hope you understand. Whenever we talk about Dionysus and Apollo, I do not see Dionysus as an antithesis of Apollo.
Sure, yeah.
To me, Dionysus is a component of Apollo.
Yeah, well, it's good to have good to have the philosophical clarification. And I guess I'm not prone to using terms in a very rigid or even very kind of disciplined way in my philosophy, unfortunately. But
the problem is that the way Nietzsche wrote about Apollo and Dionysus, he really did establish a kind of an antinomy there, didn't he?
Yeah, well, that was his own coding. He tended to rewrite a lot of things and then put his own coding. But I think we both do that. You and I do that in some ways as well. And to some degree, we preserve the original, and to some degree, we might even, unbeknownst to ourselves, do harm to the original. But there it is, different levels of different generations of thinkers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I appreciate what Nietzsche did, even though I would not use the terms that he did use. I appreciate the distinctions he was making. Those were important distinctions to be made. He was Nietzsche was a supreme intellect.
True, yeah.
And if he took liberties with words that I wouldn't take, I still have to respect what he did with it and what he was talking about. He was a supreme. I consider him to be a prophet. I mean, he had everything that a prophet is, and a prophet I could even say that I can't think of anything prophetic that Nietzsche didn't have. By the way that I look at the
Yeah, he did have those. He was a whole person, and that's quite rare. And he was also a great intellect.